This video is going to go over chapter 18. Objective 3. Objective 3 is describing the formation of the formed element components of blood. So this is talking about the red blood cells, the white blood cells, and the platelets. Life cycle of blood components. So when you donate about a unit of blood, maybe 2 units of blood, that's actually pints is what you're donating, 1 to 2 pints. How long does it take your body to recover from that? Now we're talking about blood. We're not talking about just plasma. People have been known to, go in 2 days a week and donate plasma. I'm talking about whole blood. It's going to take about 4 to 6 weeks. So that's why when you donate 1 to 2 pints of blood, you cannot donate another pint of blood for another 4 to 6 weeks. Plasma, you can donate plasma. That's why some people can donate twice a week. Plasma replenishes it in about 24 hours, depending on, how you're handling that. Because if you remember, 50% of plasma was water. So you got quite a bit of fluid in there. Hematopoiesis, also known as hematopoiesis, this is the process by which blood replacement occurs. Hemo means blood, poiesis means production. So when we're talking about hematopoiesis, we're talking about all blood cells, not just the red blood cells. We're talking about red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. So blood cell production, again, not talking about just red. Your body continually makes new blood cells to replace the old blood cells so that you have got a steady supply. Hematopoiesis starts prior to birth and continues throughout your life. There are 2 types of hematopoiesis. One of them is called medullary hematopoiesis, and this one's the one that's going to occur in the bone marrow. Look at it, medullary, that is the middle section of the bone, the medulla. If you remember when we learned about the structure of bone, that's going to be where the bone marrow is. Bone marrow, this is where blood cells get made in your bone marrow and released into your bloodstream from this location. So you can see right here, we've got a long bone, we've got the red marrow. Then as you become older, look at what happens to that red bone marrow. This is what we said in the skeletal system. It starts to get converted into fat storage, also known as yellow marrow. So by the time you're an adult and you're not needing to continuously increase your blood supply, you don't need all of that bone marrow to be cranking out new cells. You kind of reach this equilibrium. You're no longer growing in size, so you don't need to be adding to your current blood supply. And then you also have another way that you can make blood cells, and that's called extramedullary hematopoiesis. And this is what's going to occur outside of your bone marrow, and that could occur in locations such as the liver and spleen. Medullary hematopoiesis, this is blood cell production, again, within the red marrow of bones. In children, the medullary cavity of long bones, like we just saw previously. Adults, it's not going to be in those same locations necessarily. It's going to slim down the number of areas that this gets made because you don't need to be making blood cells at the same rate you did as you were growing. So again, your pelvic bones, cranial bones, vertebra, sternum, proximal epiphyses of the femur and the humerus. Proximal means it's going to be closer to the place of attachment of that hip and shoulder, not at the distal epiphyses. Extramedullary hematopoiesis, again, this is going to be the liver and the spleen. They maintain their ability to generate formed elements. This process is called extramedullary hematopoiesis or hemopoiesis. That just means outside of the medullary cavity, extramedullary, that's what that means. When a disease destroys bone marrow, for instance, maybe when a person is going through chemotherapy and they have had all of their bone marrow irradiated, maybe they're getting a bone marrow transplant, they don't have any cells making red blood cells. They don't have any locations. They're not making it any longer within the bone marrow. So the liver and the spleen can take up that job once it's no longer a location within the bone to do that. Differentiation of formed elements from stem cells. So all cells in the body are going to come from stem cells. So ultimately, The zygote, that is the cell that's formed from the fusion of a sperm and egg. That is a single cell. That is the totipotent stem cell. If you think about it, that single cell, that zygote, will form any potential cell that's going to be made in the body. Totipotent stem cell can turn into anything. As that starts to differentiate, it then becomes unable to differentiate into everything. It's going to kind of narrow down. Well, I can only differentiate into these kinds of cells, or I can only differentiate into those kinds of cells. So its ability to differentiate into any cell diminishes as those stem cells get further and further away from that zygote. So you have a pluripotent stem cell, which gives rise to multiple types of cells, not every possible cell. And then you have mesenchyme cells. These stem cells only give rise to connective tissue. For example, blood. We talked about this previously. So remember those mesenchyme cells. So if you're going to get blood, you're going to have to go back to a mesenchyme cell to get it. Now, mesenchyme cells will differentiate into hematopoietic stem cells, which will specifically only form blood cells. So remember, mesenchyme cells, they can form any kind of connective tissue. Whereas hematopoietic stem cells come from mesenchyme cells, they're only going to form those red blood cells, those white blood cells, and those platelets. So this just kind of shows you a little chart here. So your totipotent stem cell, it's the least specialized. It can differentiate into any cell. And as you go down the list, you become more specialized. So that hematopoietic stem cell, or that hemopoietic stem cell, also known as a hemocytoblast, can differentiate into white blood cells, red blood cells, and platelets only. So this chart right here, we're going to see this chart again in a subsequent objective here. So you've got this multipotent hematopoietic stem cell, also known as a hemocytoblast. It then can differentiate into a myeloid stem cell or a lymphoid stem cell. On the myeloid stem cell line, you're going to get platelets, you're going to get red blood cells, and you're going to get all of the white blood cells. Never let monkeys eat bananas, except the lymphocytes. You're going to get the neutrophils, monocytes, eosinophils, and basophils. Notice the one that's missing here is the lymphocytes. They're going to be over here on this other line. So the lymphoid stem cell line will then produce your lymphocytes. You've got your T cells and your B cells, your T lymphocytes, your B lymphocytes, and then your larger natural killer cells. When you go back and you look at the myeloid stem cell line, remember we said platelets are formed from that. I need you to understand the precursor to a platelet is this megakaryocyte. Take a look at this thing. Now, this is actually based on size. The sizes of these are purposeful, okay? So this megakaryocyte, if you look at its size in relation to all the other cells on this page, that megakaryocyte is the largest, intentionally drawn that way because it, in reality, is the largest. So I need you to understand, if I ask you a question about what is the precursor cell to a platelet and megakaryocyte is an answer choice, that's the right answer. You need to know that the precursor cell to an erythrocyte, a red blood cell, is called a reticulocyte. So I need you to know that as well. As far as the other ones, you don't have to worry about the myeloblast and the monoblast. Lymphoid stem cell line, you just need to know they're going to produce your B cells, T cells, and natural killer cells. Hematopoietic growth factors. So stem cells produce these precursor cells like the reticulocyte, which produces mature cells such as the red blood cell. Just an example there. This process is initiated by hematopoietic growth factors. How does the stem cell know what it is supposed to secrete? How does that hemocytoblast know what it is supposed to be making? Well, if erythropoietin is present, EPO, that is a hormone. Remember, we learned that in chapter 17. It is going to produce red blood cells. So kidneys secrete EPO when oxygen levels are low. That is going to cause the production of red blood cells. Thrombopoietin, also a hormone, which was not discussed in chapter 17. You can probably figure out what this hormone is going to cause to happen. It's produced by the liver and kidneys, and it triggers the development of a megakaryocyte into platelets. It basically tells that megakaryocyte to release the platelets that are within the cytoplasm of that megakaryocyte. Now, cytokines, also a protein, as opposed to the other two, which are hormones. This is secreted by red bone marrow. It's secreted by leukocytes. It's secreted by macrophages, fibroblasts, and endothelial cells, and it aids in resistance to disease. There are two types of cytokines. There are what's called colony stimulating factors. They differentiate myeloblasts into granular leukocytes. So this would be what gives rise to your neutrophils, your eosinophils, and your basophils. These are your granular white blood cells. Now, interleukins, also a type of cytokine produced by a variety of cells and plays a role in immunity and inflammation. So that's all we're really going to talk about with interleukins. Okay, looking at your in-class questions in the handout, take a look at question set 3, and I'll give you a second to answer that one. Okay, that would be D. I encourage you all when you're taking your test to read all answer choices, not just pick the first right answer that you see, because you might have accidentally picked B and then stopped reading. I need you to read all answer choices so you make sure you catch those ones that are maybe a both situation here. Question number 2, I'll give you a second on this one. Okay, so we should have gotten 3, 1, 2. That would have been answer choice C. And I'll give you a second to take a look at this one. Okay, so you should have gotten red blood cells come from reticulocytes, platelets come from megakaryocytes, neutrophils come from myeloid stem cells. Now, that could have been a neutrophil, an eosinophil, a basophil, or a monocyte, correct? And then number 6, T cells, natural killer cells, or B cells would have all come from the lymphoid stem cell line. I'll give you a second to take a look at number 7. Remember, platelets are also called thrombocytes, so thrombopoietin is what will give rise to platelets when that hormone is present. And that concludes objective 3.